I am so glad that Lindsay and the children brought some levity to this service this morning because I don't have a lot. Gail said she didn't hear a lot of sighing. She didn't hear any sighing when she reminded you that we are in the book of Job, but let me tell you, I sighed a lot this week. And I cried a lot this week. I want to assure you that I am fine, but sometimes God blesses the preacher-to-be with the emotions and the experience of the text, and I was living in Job. Not only the text that you heard read this morning, but I've been reading regularly through the whole book. I was also glad that Gail mentioned the tree and the fact that we are Silverwood. And Silverwood, I find so much hope here, so much encouragement. It is so good to be a part of you. So the passage I get to preach on today finds Job pretty gloomy, and understandably so. We might even term him as despairing. Did he have any reason to hope? His personal world had fallen apart. Could despair and hope coexist? Honestly, when our own personal world seems to be falling apart around us, can despair and hope live within us at the same time in those moments? There's an old hymn that contains these words: "Give to the winds thy fears, hope, and be undismayed. God hears thy sighs and counts thy tears. God shall lift up thy head." This is one stanza from a hymn written by Paul Gerhardt, a pastor who lived in Germany in the 17th century. It was written in German, of course, and later was translated into English by John Wesley. Both men had reason to fear at times, and probably to despair at times. Pastor Gerhardt said a sad farewell, one by one, to 4 of his 5 children. Perhaps this line in the hymn grew out of that experience. "Commit thou all thy griefs and ways unto his hands." Gerhardt tried to bring pastors together within the Lutheran and the Reformed traditions in his area, and he was relieved of his pastoral role when he refused to comply with an edict that was bringing difficulties for the Lutheran pastors that he was relating to. During the year that he lived without employment, his wife died, leaving him a single parent to their one remaining child. "Commit thou all thy griefs and ways into God's hands. Give the winds your fears. God hears the sighs and counts the tears." Some 80 years later, John Wesley became immersed in the hymns of the Moravians as they traveled together in a ship over the sea to the Americas. The German version of this hymn was one that they sang regularly. Perhaps it brought comfort to Wesley on the stormy and difficult passage, and later to the Wesley brothers as they traveled into hostile towns to spread the gospel. I read a story this past week about Gerhardt's writing of this hymn that may or may not be true. The story goes that Gerhardt and his wife were, at that point, homeless and afraid. And in despair, Gerhardt's wife broke down in tears. Trying to comfort her, Gerhardt reminded her of scripture passages about God's provision and keeping. But comforting another and comforting one's self are 2 different things. After his wife was settled for the night, Gerhardt went outside to be alone. And there in the garden, he broke down in despair. He felt he had come to his most desperate hour. And there in the dark, he began to sense God's comforting presence. And it was then that he began to write the words of this comforting hymn. Now, whether or not this story is true, what followed this story is most certainly true. And I quote, "It is often in our most desperate and despairing times that God makes his presence known most clearly. God uses our sufferings and troubles to show us that he is our only source of strength. And when we see this truth, like Pastor Gerhardt, we receive new hope. Are you facing a great trial? Take heart. Put yourself in God's hands. Wait for his timing. He will give you a song in the night." End of quote. I know this is true because it happened to me. We were living in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania. Home to the Mennonite Publishing House for over 100 years. This is the town where Conrad and I began as pastors. It is also the town where my parents lived when I was born. The Mennonite Publishing House played an important role in the town of Scottsdale, in the lives of the people who attended the 2 Mennonite churches that existed in Scottsdale at this time. And historically in my own life, my paternal grandparents had both worked at the pub. That's what we called the place. Oh, I did bring a little levity. So both of my paternal grandparents worked at the pub. I had started life influenced by many wonderful people who worked at the pub, and now was pastor to many more wonderful people who worked there. But times were changing. Many publishing companies were under duress, and Mennonite Publishing House was a small company. Many factors played into the downsizing that happened, taking the number of employees from 100 to 7 in a very short period of time. Needless to say, this period of time was very difficult for the people of the churches, for the community, because they also employed people from the community, and for Conrad and me. During this period of downsizing, the 2 Mennonite churches in town became one, with Conrad and me as pastors. I was a representative to the Constituency Leaders Council during this time of downsizing. And Constituency Leaders Council functions like an elder board for Mennonite Church USA. So this was a group of many leaders and constituents from across Mennonite Church USA. At this meeting, the then CEO of Mennonite Publishing House took me aside to let me know that an announcement was coming that would greatly affect the now one Mennonite church in Scottsdale. He also knew it would be difficult for me and wanted to give me a heads up before it became public. All operations of what was now called Menno Media would be moving to Harrisonburg. 3 major families in the struggling, newly merged church would be moving to Harrisonburg for their jobs. These 3 families included 3 of my closest friends. I was devastated. Our town, our churches, Conrad and I had been through so much already. I left the hallway where we were talking and headed to the restroom where I broke down in tears. A few women tried to comfort me as I sobbed. They were not like Job's friends, thankfully. But I was in no shape to attend the next session, so I missed the formal announcement. That night, as I finally slept, I was woken up with a song. God was singing in my ear. I will come to you in the silence. I will lift you from all your fear. I am hope for all who are hopeless. In the shadows of the night, I will be your light. Come and rest in me. God gave me a song in the night. Not one that I had written, but one that did offer me some hope and courage to go on. My story is not Job's story, but I think I know how Job was feeling. There are many differences, lots and lots of differences, but there's a crucial difference, and that is that Job was without a song. Job was without a song. He couldn't sense God's presence at this moment in this portion of the scripture that we're visiting today. Where was God? He longed for God. Job was dealing with huge financial losses. Except for his wife, the family had all died, and he was dealing with deep, unimaginable grief. Physically, he was suffering from the itching and the pain that came from the boils that covered his body. And initially, his friends had provided a comforting presence, but then they began in turns to accuse him, believing that he must have done something to bring all this suffering upon himself. So Job went from a man who was suffering deeply to a man unjustly accused. He becomes a man defending his innocence, which brings us to today's passage. Today, he becomes philosophical. I have to keep turning this on. There we go. In Job chapter 14, we hear him say, "There is hope for a tree, even if it is cut down. It will sprout again, and its sprouts will not cease. The mere scent of water will make it bud again, and it will put forth branches as if it were a young plant." I offer you a few pictures to show you what Job is talking about here. But then, right after that, despair hits again. But mortals, well, we're mortal. Humans die, and they don't rise again. They won't wake up from the sleep of death. And now Job turns to prayer. He hasn't been much of a praying man through this ordeal. Before it started, he had prayed regularly. He'd prayed for his children, just in case they'd done something that needed God's forgiveness. He prayed. And then when his world came crashing apart, came falling apart, he didn't pray much. But here he turns to prayer. He turns to God and he says, "If only you would hide me away in Sheol." Now I need to stop here and explain to you a bit of where Job is coming from. First of all, at this point, the idea of life after death was just not a part of the thinking. Sheol was believed to be the place where all humans went after death, everybody. Sheol is the place where they wait for God's judgment, and perhaps while they wait, they work, which explains Job's words, "All the days of my service, while in Sheol, I would wait until my release. And when you, God, call, I would answer you." Job is longing for a restored relationship with God. Can you feel the longing? If only you would call me, I would answer you. Psalm 22 contains words that Jesus called out on the cross. But I can hear Job calling out these words too. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And by night, and I find no rest. I hear the words of Psalm 22 and Job's words. If only you would call on me, I would answer you. Does Job even dare to hope while living in such intense misery? Can he risk hope if those hopes are only going to be smashed again? If he remains in his despair, at least he won't have to live through rising in hope and falling again. Have you been there? The hope for college acceptance, but the letter is one of rejection. The hope that this job will pay the bills, but the job goes to someone else. The hope that the medical tests will be negative, but no, they confirm your worst fears. The hope for relationship, but the person walks away. The hope that dies and dies again and again. Despair is just easier. So for this brief time, Job turns to prayer, but he hears only silence. Job stops talking to God. Ever stop talking to God? I have. When I stopped talking to God, it wasn't so much out of despair as it was out of anger. And anger may have been a factor for Job, too. After all, he had been faithful. He had lived a God-honoring life. And now God is not bringing justice and seems distant, uncaring. What an awful place to be. My heart goes out to Job. This is not the end of the story. We aren't even quite into the middle of the book yet. But for Job, in this moment, it seems like a forever awful ending. Job is living in a seemingly forever awful ending, but we have just a little bit more to cover in the story today. We jump from chapter 14 to chapter 19 to find Job longing to be remembered after his death. Oh, that my words were inscribed in a book. Well, guess what, Job? They are. They are, and we are spending a month of Sundays in them. It's even named after Job. But Job doesn't know that. And he wants to be remembered. And then he thinks maybe a book won't last long enough. What if his words could be written with an iron pen engraved on a rock that would last forever? And then he says these words that have been memorialized by George Frederick Handel. I know that my Redeemer lives. Who can hear that and not hear the sound of a soprano singing this aria found in Handel's Messiah? I know that my Redeemer lives, and then in the end he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, then in my flesh I will see God. But Job was not thinking of Jesus when he said that his Redeemer lives. These words remind us of Jesus. And I'm so glad that we sang these words of truth in our songs this morning. Thank you. But Redeemer meant something entirely different to Job. He was thinking of a relative, a kinsman defender, the closest male relative who was responsible for protecting a person's interests when that individual was unable to do so. The kinsman defender or redeemer would do such things as buy back family property that had been sold in distress, or recover what had been stolen, or redeem kinsmen sold into slavery, or avenge a murdered kinsman's blood. Remember the story of Ruth and Boaz? Boaz was acting as Ruth's kinsman defender when he married her, saving both her and her mother-in-law from a life of hardship and starvation. Job had lost hope in God ever hearing his voice again and coming to his aid, let alone bringing justice back into his life. But maybe his kinsman defender could take up his cause against God. Job knows his Redeemer lives, and perhaps he can restore his life. Here we catch a glimpse of hope through the work of the Redeemer. Job's children will never be restored to him. He will live with this emptiness of loss forever. Will God give Job a song in the night? We shall see. But maybe, just maybe, for now, some hope can live alongside the devastation and despair of Job's life. Our song of response speaks of this glimmer of hope. There's a wild hope in the wind, ends with these words. The future is dim, but we want to live into a wild, wild hope. The editors of Voices Together wanted Laura Brown, who wrote this song, to take out the part about the dim future, but Laura refused. She may have been living in the personal reality of wild hope in the face of despair. She wrote the words to this song in 2014 and the music in 2017. Laura died of cancer in 2020, the same year that our Voices Together hymnal was copywritten. I suspect that the editors were having their conversation with Laura in the midst of cancer treatments. A wild hope that lives on in the face of despair is a hope that we can hang on to.